My guest today is none other than the legend, Thom Loverro. Thom, thanks for giving us some time today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was glad to have you on today. This has been a year like no other.
Always happy. Uh, what happened?
You froze on me. I got you back now.
Okay.
Thom, I was glad to have you on today for a look back on a season that has been unique to say the least. I'm curious what you'll find most interesting about this year that's gone by as pertains to the Washington football team.
Well, at the beginning of the year, when Ron Rivera first got hired, I sort of like compared his path to success to Joe Torre and George Steinbrenner with the Yankees. When Joe Torre got hired to manage the Yankees, he had immediate success. He won a World Series his first year, won 2 out of 3 his first 3 years. And that empowered him to the point where he was more powerful than the owner. And even though Steinbrenner wanted to meddle, he couldn't afford to because he couldn't afford to alienate Torre because Torre was far more popular. I said this was really the path for Rivera in dealing with an owner like Dan Snyder. His only path to success is become successful and powerful pretty quickly so that he can push off the owner if and when that point happens. And he took kind of a step in the direction by what he did this year. It wasn't 10-6, but it was 7-9 and an NFC East title. And I think that helps him. I think the coach has become a very sympathetic figure in his battle with cancer. He's a very likable figure in his dealings publicly with the media. And I think he really has empowered himself as arguably the most powerful guy in the organization. Now, is it enough to hold off the owner if things, get dicey? I don't know, but I think he took a step in the right direction by the limited success he had this year.
Yeah, because 7-9 is nice. I mean, in fairness, he more than doubled the win total from last year. But I think it was the way that we were kind of allowed to see him take control, to your point, of the organization. It is new and fresh, so it's hard to know what the long-term outcome will be. But certainly jettisoning number 7 off the team before the season even ended at least showed some power that I don't think we've seen the head coach have in a while here.
Well, let's not forget, people come to that conclusion. Mike Shanahan benched the owner's quarterback, Donovan McNabb, and then traded him in his first year. So it's been done before.
Yes, that's true. And I feel like maybe the coach that we have in place now has more national clout. This team that we're rooting for this year seems to be more likable than some that we've had in the past, particularly with the new defensive end that they added this year.
Oh, listen, they have become very likable. I call them the NFL's teddy bear at one point this year because not just because because of Ron Rivera and his story, and then you have Alex Smith, the Alex Smith story that everybody fell in love with. The quarterback who might have lost his leg at one point is now back on the field competing and winning. So, yeah, I mean, and including that, no matter what your view was of the name, not having the name anymore took away something that turned off a segment of the population. So you combine all those three things together, and it's a very unique position for Washington football. They were a lovable national favorite. Absolutely.
Do you think, I know that they have said for the next year it will remain Washington football team. It seems like if they go at least 8-8 next year, certainly if they win a division, Washington football team certainly sounds like the long-term solution. Do you believe that?
No, I think they'll come up with a regular name. I think no name reminds you that they used to have a name. I think 10 years from now, you have somebody who moves to Washington, D.C., who wants to root for the NFL team and wonders why they don't have a name. Then they'll hear the story about Redskins again. So I think it's a reminder that they don't have a name. I think one of the reasons I think legitimately they want to do the research and marketing research and come up with something that works. I also think that if Dan Snyder has any sense as a businessman, if he's not going to own this team at some point, it's more valuable without the name change to let the new owners change the name than it is if he turns around and changes the name now. I don't know if that's coming into play, but that would be good business. If there's a risk of him having to sell the team, the value goes up a little bit more to the new owner if they get to name it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't, but you're right. It certainly does make it more valuable. The product on the field makes it the most valuable. Winning cures all ailments. You have to have a quarterback to do that. Is the quarterback for next year on the roster right now?
Well, the quarterback for next year may be on the roster. The quarterback for the future is not on the roster. I know everybody was worshiping at the feet of Taylor Heineke and his stunning playoff performance against Tampa Bay that I certainly didn't see coming, since I had never seen Taylor Heineke play before,
That's
since
right.
I didn't watch Old Dominion play college football. But I mean, look, the guy was on the street. Okay, the Kurt Warners of this world are like winning the lottery. Most of the guys who are bagging groceries somewhere or on the street somewhere, they're there for a reason. And so and they get exposed over the course of time. For every Kurt Warner, there's 20 Gardner Minshews, guys who look great in certain situations, but they get exposed over the course of a season. I would think Taylor Heineke fits in that category. I think Kyle Allen is still probably their quarterback moving forward. Ron Rivera said they'll have a competition next year. I'm wondering what happened to the competition this year.
He is on record. He is on record saying he wishes he had done that.
A few weeks after he got hired, I know, but he had said, like he did for Kyle Allen, he said we're going to have a competition. So he had said 4 months after he was hired that they were going to have a competition, and at the opening of training camp, he said that they were going to have a competition. Why didn't they have it? What was the reason for not having that competition? Especially now, since he says he regrets not having it. What would have stopped him from doing it? I have a suggestion: the owner.
Okay. Right. Right.
Because
not necessarily that the owner told him.
On the record, if you go back and look on the record, he said repeatedly that there was going to be a competition, and then it didn't happen. And we never got a clear explanation as to why. I mean, it couldn't have been because Dwayne Haskins knew the playbook better, because Kyle Allen ran the same playbook at Carolina. It's not like he was unfamiliar with it.
Yes, and I think Coach is on record saying he wishes, in retrospect, that had actually been a competition. And to your point, it's hard to know whether the owner sent down or whether he was sending memos up the chain as to whether the guy couldn't play. The
follow-up question to his regret is, why didn't you?
Right. Are trades possibilities for you? If Houston calls and says they need 3 number ones for Deshaun Watson, are you in the business of giving up 3 ones for a quarterback again?
I'd have no problem if they did it. My own personal viewpoint about how to run an NFL team is I am hoping that I have smart personnel people in place that can look at every draft and tell me in the third or fourth round that there's a quarterback there that they think can be developed into an NFL quarterback. And I'm picking a quarterback every draft, whether it's in the fifth round or the third round. I'm picking one every draft. I don't think you have to have a first round pick to have a successful quarterback. But that's if you got good personnel people that you have faith in. If you don't have that, then yeah, I think you got to take a shot on a Deshaun Watson, who would just be, I mean, just a tremendous boost on so many levels, or to a lesser extent, a Matt Stafford, different quarterback, but a guy who would probably do much better if he got out of Detroit.
Absolutely. And I guess that Stafford wouldn't hurt you quite as bad. Maybe you're looking more along the lines of an Alex Smith type deal where you're sending a couple picks and a player. Because I'm with you. I'm sure he's not ready for another rebuild. And out of nowhere, this Washington team is kind of poised to be in win now mode if they add a weapon and a reliable quarterback. It's interesting the things we've learned from Ron Rivera this year. He has an interesting way of describing things, I guess, of assigning accolades. When asked about the quarterback situation, if he thought they could have made it without Alex Smith, he said, yeah, he thought they could with Kyle Allen. He kind of did the same thing with the VP of player, Kyle Smith. He gave everybody else credit for this great offseason. Wasn't really in the business of giving Kyle Smith a lot of accolades for this lauded free agent class. That makes more sense now that they're looking to hire a GM from outside. Are you surprised by that?
Well, I'm not inside enough to know the dynamic between Kyle Smith and Ron Rivera. I think it's a reasonable assumption, the fact that Rivera is pretty savvy when he deals with the media. What he leaves out is almost as important as what he includes. And the fact that he has left out Kyle Smith in talking about how they built their season for success would indicate that that's not a good working relationship for him moving forward. And you're right, they're calling in a bunch of candidates, if according to reports, to be interviewed for that job. At least now, in the old days, they'd be forcing Kyle Smith to sit in on the interviews like they did with Greg Minuski when they were trying to replace him as defensive coordinator. At least they're not doing that to Kyle Smith, saying, we want you in there to look at this guy. We want to take your job and tell us what you think of him.
It's just crazy, some of the things that we've witnessed over the last decade plus.
That was amazing. Poor Greg Minuski.
I had completely forgot about that until you said that. So funny. And I'm curious your thoughts. Do you have a preference? We have moved. It has been a long time since we've had a head man around here that is defensive oriented. Now, the problem with that, I suppose, is you're always changing offensive coordinators if your winning ball games and the offense works. I guess that's why the league has moved so much to offensive head coaches, because if the system works and it's in there, then you should be good to go. I'm curious if you have a preference one way or the other.
In terms of what?
Who the head man is, if your head coach is a defensive or an offensive guy.
I've got these are guys who are second and third level in personnel departments around the NFL. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't have the expertise to tell you who is. I mean, a sentimental favorite is Martin Mayhew, who played for this franchise, who I think I've been told is a smart guy and highly regarded. But actually, my personal sentimental favorite is Marty Hurney, the Carolina general manager who worked with Ron in Carolina, who's a former Washington Times sports writer. Yeah, so right. I'm certainly favored towards him.
Yeah. Well, I actually was asking about the head coach.
The head coach.
Yeah. If the head coach is Ron Rivera is the first defensive minded head coach we've had here in a while. And I wonder if you find there to be a difference between the head coaches that lean offensively or defensively.
Well, I think it's kind of hard in this league not to win without an offensive minded head coach. But for this organization, they needed a level-headed coach with professional experience that knows how to deal with people. So this organization had so many issues to deal with in hiring a coach that they should get on. They should thank the Carolina Panthers for firing Ron Rivera, that they were able to get him so quickly. All things being equal in today's NFL, I'm going with an offensive head coach. You know, and sort of like a Joe Gibbs, Richie Pettibone situation. You know, Joe Gibbs probably didn't say 5 words to defensive players over the course of a season. Richie ran the defense, but Joe was the head coach, and I mean that's generally what I would prefer. But in terms of priorities and getting a coach here, they were lucky to land Ron Rivera.
It's been since Schottenheimer that we've had a defensive coordinator as the head coach. Is that true?
Well, yeah, you had Spurrier, you had Gibbs, you had Zorn, you almost had Greg Williams, but not quite, and Shanahan. So, yeah, it's been a while, and that makes sense because the owner, being a fan, is enamored with offense. You know, I mean, that was what he was in love with. So that's why you had the string of offensive coaches here. But it got to the point where you just needed to find an adult, and they found an adult.
Tom, when we look back on the time that Ryan Kerrigan spent here, assuming that he won't be back next year, how will you remember him in the history of the Washington franchise?
A very good player, not a great player, a very good player who got held a lot.
Yes, he did.
Got
Yes,
held a lot when I'd be there at the stadium and watching him, when I'd focus on him and play. I think he was certainly a successful #1 draft pick. I think he's going to go down as one of the maybe top 5 pass rushers in franchise history. I know he has the sack record, but Dexter Manley is probably the best pass rusher that this franchise ever had. And Ken Harvey's right behind him. Ken Harvey, it was a great pass rusher. But Ryan Kerrigan did proud by this franchise. He never embarrassed it. He made you feel good that he played for your team. And that puts him ahead of the game for this team. So I got nothing but fond memories from Ryan Kerrigan. And he'll be in that Ring of Fame someday, as well he should be.
Yes, he'll walk right into that ring of fame. Another guy that we are not sure about for next year is Brandon Sheriff. Are you in the business of paying guards $17 million a year?
I'm in the business of having good offensive lines. And if that's what it takes to do it, I don't have any particular problem with it. I don't know what he means to the locker room in terms of leadership. You know, I look up the road at the franchise that seems to do everything right, the Baltimore Ravens, and I look at Marshall Yonda and what an important figure he was to that organization. And when he retired, the stories you heard about the leadership and the tone he set. I don't know if Brandon Sheriff is that kind of guy, but I'm a big believer in building from the inside out. I think you can win with average skill positions if you have a strong offensive line, but you can't do it the other way. If you have great skill players and a mediocre offensive line, it's going to come back to haunt you. So I'm in favor of investing in the offensive line and a deep offensive line as well.
Yes, to your point about drafting a quarterback every year, I would think running back and tackle should be the same way. Just can't have enough of them. Tom, if I asked you to compare this division championship to 2012 and 2015, to me, this one feels a little different. Maybe like this is actually sustainable. Is that fair, or am I living in the moment?
Well, look, 2015, I never took that seriously because I never took Jay Gruden seriously as a head coach. He always seemed like a bit of a clown. Uh, so I just never saw any long-term success with Jay Gruden. 2012, even after Robert Griffin III went down with the injury in the Seattle playoff game, I still thought that was a game-changing season. I thought they had a head coach who had won 2 Super Bowls, who had built something here that was going to be sustainable success. I thought the quarterback was going to continue to grow under Mike and Kyle Shanahan. So I think 2012 for a lot of fans was much more of a real feeling of of building towards something than this is. I mean, Shanahan in 2010, his first year, he went 6-10, didn't win a division, one less win than Ron Rivera, but 9 of those games that they allowed 17 points or less. That's pretty impressive from a roster that was far worse than what Ron Rivera took over this year. Mike Shanahan's first year, 2010, there were 2 homegrown number 1 picks on the roster that he inherited. Ron Rivera inherited 6 number 1 picks on the roster that he took over. So I just have a feeling that 2012 was more realistic, and that I just felt that Mike Shanahan was and still remains a better coach than Ron Rivera is.
Yes, that's probably fair. And we know how that worked out. They had hoped to have Kyle just stay through, right? And then things
Yeah.
deteriorated that way. It was when they do the 30 for 30 on that one,
Oh yeah.
it'll be many segments on that one. It was just an incredible time.
Yes. Yeah, it
Uh,
was incredible. From the time the quarterback walked into the coach's room and said, "These are the plays I'm not using anymore," to his all in for week 1 marketing campaign.
it's just incredible. Also, it doesn't probably get mentioned enough what the position coaches have done this year compared to years past. I mean, they put in a lot of guys with no experience at all this year and seem to not really miss a beat. The other one is the training staff probably needs to get a lot of kudos too. I can't remember a season in which we stayed this healthy.
It was a drastic contrast in the training staff to certainly what we had experienced before. And the training staff actually came under fire and when your training staff becomes an issue with the players in the locker room as well as the public, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So what the training staff did this year is deserves a lot of credit. You're right. They stayed healthy. They stayed out of the news, for one thing. You didn't hear players carping about the training staff, a very sensitive issue to some people in that locker room, particularly after Trent Williams left. But I think that a big reason for their success was the quality of the coaching staff went up significantly from the year before. I mean, Jay Gruden had guys on that coaching staff in 2019 who had been out of football for a couple of years. I couldn't get jobs anyplace else, like a Rob Ryan and guys like that. No, I think that Ron Rivera put together a real quality coaching staff, and that you could see that in the way they carry themselves in games. And they took a chance on Scott Turner, Norv Turner's son, who had like 4 games experience, I think, in Carolina as the offensive coordinator after he got promoted there. And I was skeptical of Scott Turner, but he had some really good game plans for a lot of games for the quarterback of this team moving forward. And I think that he's a good fit for Ron Rivera. And look, Norv Turner may not have been a head coach, but no one ever questioned his skill as an offensive coordinator. And Scott Turner seems to have inherited those qualities.
Scott Turner took a lot of heat this year from fans. I was surprised by that. When you actually got competent quarterback play, I think you really could see what the plan was. And the last game of the season, I think, shows you that the offense works.
Yeah, I mean, look, the whole coaching staff gets a lot of credit for taking a quarterback that was on the street and preparing him to play in an NFL playoff game against Tom Brady. I mean, like obviously Taylor Heineke gets a lot of credit, but the coaches prepared him and put him out there and gave him a game plan that he could execute and have success with. And they get a lot of credit for that. What's interesting is I think the weakest link on the coaching staff is their defensive coordinator, Jack Del Rio. As many kudos as the defense got, there were some games, including the Tampa game, where the defense let them down. I mean, no, you know, I know everyone wants to celebrate the great loss against Tampa, but they could have won that game. No one knew that before the game started, but they gave up 143 yards rushing to Tampa and 501 yards total offense. That should never have happened.
You're right, Tom. It doesn't get talked about nearly enough, but the defense was not good that game. And
No.
to your point, they had two different opportunities within striking distance in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, people need to take a step back and say, hey, they could have won that game. You know, that's kind of a shock to everybody, but they could be playing this weekend.
One last one before we let you go. Tom, I'm curious your thoughts. I grew up with Sweet Pea Whitaker down in the beach area. Why did boxing dissolve? Why is it that MMA became a thing and boxing just kind of withered away?
Boy, that's a complicated question. One reason, look, boxing lives and dies by the heavyweight division. Sweet Pea is one of my favorite fighters. I covered a couple of his fights, including his fight against De La Hoya in Las Vegas, which he won and then got robbed of the decision. So, I mean, Sweet Pea was one of my favorites, and he'll always be missed. But boxing lives and breathes with the heavyweight division. And the heavyweight division, its last gasp in the 90s with Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe, and then the return of Mike Tyson coming out of prison. But, you know, the golden age for the heavyweights was the 70s and to some extent the 60s. Well, if you were a big young man growing up in 1960, 61, you could still make more money as a heavyweight fighter than you could as an NFL player or an NBA player. I mean, that changed in the 70s. You know, I always like to say the heavyweight champions are now playing tight end and power forward. Okay, so once you could make money more playing basketball and football, the athletes that would have been your next heavyweight champion class gravitated to different sports. There's so many other complications, different governing bodies, their refusal to match fighters, quality fighters against each other for fear of losing. But you know, MMA and particularly UFC has the advantage because UFC is run like a kingdom. I mean, Dana White decides who fights who. So it's kind of easier to control those issues when you're like NASCAR, when you're in charge and making all the decisions. Boxing doesn't have that, and I don't know if it ever will. You'll have this sporadic fighter that captures people's attention from here to there and there, but it'll never be what it was.
Tom, love to have you back on for some baseball once we get started up there, but I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me anytime.